Welcome to ISKCON of Silicon Valley's Wednesday Bhagavad Gita class. Am I still audible clearly, Prabhu?
Yes.
Okay. So you can share the prayers. We will be doing the prayers first before we get started on today's topic. The Mangalacharan prayers we will do. Yeah.
Or you want to do Mangala?
So first we offer our prayers so that we can share the knowledge of the topic within which there is spiritual knowledge embedded as well. So we seek the blessings of the devotees, the acharyas, the gurus, and through these prayers, and then we will get started with the topic. Om Ajnana Timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kada Mahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Dalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Deenabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधार श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे. Hare Krishna. Thank you all for joining Wednesday evening's Bhagavad Gita class from ISKCON of Silicon Valley remotely. So today's topic is quite a pertinent and interesting topic. It is on digital fasting. Yesterday, some of you may know that we had Ekadashi. We do fasting, and the fasting is usually from grains and beans, and it is customary. And on that note, today's topic is on digital fasting and break it down before the breakdown. So we will see how the digital era is both a boon and a bane, and excessive indulgence can cause breakdowns. And before that happens, we need to take a step back and break it down into what is compatible with our propensity and requirements. So the layout of today's presentation is going to be Let's see if the slides are moving first. Okay, 1 second. Yeah. So we'll outline the digital paradigm that is so taken for granted that it's no longer spoken about, and why we need to speak about it, and the kind of vicious cycle that we subject ourselves to in the process, primarily due to our conditioned minds, and therefore we need caution in abundance to deal with the digital paradigm. And the core problem of how we get ourselves into the vicious cycle and why does the core problem arise, we'll look at the root cause, and we will also explore some practical solutions based on the wisdom from Bhagavad Gita. So the digital paradigm, as I mentioned at the outset, it is both a boon and a bane. So we have some advantages that we cannot ignore, and we have some disadvantages that is all the more unignorable. Now, the pros are that earlier, if we needed to get information, we would probably wait for newspapers to arrive if it is material information, or spiritual information, we would wait for the guru to arrive uh, through physical means, and we might have to commute across places to get that knowledge. And nowadays, we have both material as well as spiritual information readily available thanks to the digital paradigm. However, on the downside, there is just so much information that it becomes overloaded in our consciousness. And we'll see what kind of problems this causes. And they are simply alarming. And the other advantage of the digital paradigm is not only we can intake information quickly, but we can also express it quickly. In other words, we can easily reach out to people. We no longer have to wait for 5,000 people to gather in a particular place, make lots of arrangements to convey the same information that can be easily conveyed over digital media. On the downside, it can very easily hook us into an addiction, and that's an appropriate word for it, as we'll see eventually. And so we unknowingly overindulge because it's just so captivating and attractive to indulge for the conditioned mind. And the third main advantage is that we have variety of content at our disposal. So pretty much any field of knowledge, any field of information, music, so many other types of content the human being can engage with. And this engagement, we will see, easily transforms into attachment. And when that deepens, it leads to overwhelming and breakdown. So that's the disadvantage of it. And as you might have noted by now, the common pattern is using in moderation is ideal, and using in profusion leads to breakdown. So the first column was all using in moderation, tapping into the advantages of the digital paradigm. And the second column previously was on how using in profusion causes a lot of problems. So this is an example of how there can be extremities in engaging with the digital paradigm that we are inevitably a part of. On one end, one can have a complete negation to it. One can lead a disconnected life in the forest or in the Himalayas or any place of your choice without any access to digital gadgets whatsoever. And that would result in isolation. And it is great for someone who is completely absorbed or realized in their spiritual practice, or in their sadhana. But for most people, this isolation leads to desolation or um, feeling emptiness or loneliness when we cannot engage or when we don't take advantage of the digital paradigm. And this is also why negation is not necessarily a viable solution. And on the other extreme is profusion. When we start excessively indulging in this digital media, and that leads to cognitive overload and eventually leading to a collapse in our mental state or cognitive states. And moderation is ideal. And in moderation, uh, we tap into the advantages of the social media without being engulfed by it. In other words, the
Prabhu,
moderate use of the digital paradigm or the moderate engagement with the digital paradigm results in empowerment but not enslavement. So we will see in a bit what this means. We certainly tap into the advantages, at the same time not giving in our whole existence to the digital paradigm.
Haribol, Prabhu.
Yes.
Prabhu, are you sharing?
Yes, can you see my slides
No,
move
not
or no?
your slides.
Do you see this?
Not yet.
What do you see on the screen right now?
Yourself.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wait.
Just maybe unshare and share again, Prabhu.
Yeah, let me just unshare and share it.
In the beginning, I could see, but somehow again, I think it went away.
Okay, okay. Let me just share this again. Do you see it now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm not going to recap as much as just showing the slides. So this is the table we were talking about, how the moderate use of social media can be a boon, but the excessive indulgence is definitely a bane. And the next slide we just talked about is the pendulum type model to describe our engagement with the digital paradigm. Either we can completely negate it, and either that means we are in denial or we have transcended. Both are possible. And on the other extreme is profusion, where there is excessive indulgence with the digital paradigm, and that eventually leads to cognitive overload and breakdown. Moderation is the best, and that results in empowerment but not enslavement. So, ideally, we would like to think our usage is moderate because we need whatever we are doing with our gadgets. Um, and there are studies to indicate what I'm about to share. The reality is, unfortunately, this, which is we are pretty much bound by the devices. So much so that studies show that people have described a feeling of incompleteness and even imagination that their phone is vibrating and pushing notifications when it's not the case at all. So, this is how the human mind can actually fall in the trap of the digital devices if it's not trained to engage with it in a mature manner. And the worst part is we aren't even aware of this. We don't even know this is happening with us. And yeah, so this is one of the potencies of Maya, which is called Avaranatmika Shakti, or in other words, the consciousness is so covered that we have absolutely no idea that we are part of the equation where we are being enslaved, while we tend to think that we are being empowered. So the next part of it is how within the digital paradigm, statistics show that more than um, it being a boon, that people can easily succumb to it. Of course, there are lots of advantages, and we don't need to speak of the advantages really. Everybody is aware of it. What we do need to speak are the disadvantages and how we can counteract them. So the vicious cycle, uh, before we get into what the cycle is, we'll see the symptoms of it. The American Academy of Pediatricians recommends that those who are within the age of 15 to 19, adolescents, they they have engaged, for example, like 2 hours per day. However, stats show that it's 6 to 9 hours of screen time that the kids in that age group engage, which is like 3 to 5 times higher. And there are studies that are published in very reputed journals. This is Journal of American Medical Association, which indicates that teens spending 3 hours on social media double their risk of depression. And so much so that just recently the US Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, has suggested that there needs to be a warning label on social media for the sheer fact that the overall health risk posed by social media is just as profound as that of alcohol or cigarettes, which are the only ones that carry the warning label. And we may not even be aware of what a serious problem that is. And this is the other one I was alluding to, phantom vibrations. So people crave for notifications so much so that they just start imagining that they're being notified, even if even if it's not the case, and feeling incomplete when their phones are not around. So if you take a step back and think about it, it's quite a vulnerable and difficult situation that the world has put itself in, and especially the young minds, which are so receptive to information, is pretty much being bombarded. And there has been a very interesting study that was done on how, and this is the cycle that I was talking about. Pretty much it's a vicious cycle, because once you get in, it's difficult to get out. And you pick your phone, and that leads to a dopamine increase. So maybe you're expecting some engagement with social media, you're expecting people to like your post, comment on them, you're expecting favorable comments. So things like that, basically some way of getting attention. And that correlates with the increase of dopamine, the hormone that's responsible, or rather, that is a symptom when we feel happy. And because of that association, we develop this tendency of associating titillation, stimulation, happiness with the phone or any gadget of your choice. And therefore, the human psyche develops a habit to start picking it, even when it's not required. And this study, which was published in American Economic Review, so it states that when people were provided with incentives, they could actually control their screen time use. And for a period of time when that was done, after that, when the incentives were removed, they adjusted to the new reality. So, in other words, this persistence of not using the phone for long enough is merely a habit that can be cultivated. Just like we fell into the trap, we can also walk out of the trap. And both happened because we repeatedly subscribed to the practice of uncontrolled use of digital technology. And therefore, we can come out of it the same way by developing healthy habits. So that is one aspect of it. And the other aspect is when the participants were given the ability to set limits on their future screen time, they found that it substantially reduced the use. And what that means is we actually don't need all the time or most people don't need all the time they actually engage with the media, the digital media. So even if that were cut down by a certain amount, it would still not hamper productivity. In other words, there is a lack of self-control because the mind just likes to shop around the digital world. We'll see in a bit what this analogy is about. So the core issue, as Krishna puts it so wonderfully in the Bhagavad Gita, is there is a lack of knowledge and there is a lack of detachment. And interestingly, these both are actually byproducts. Knowledge and detachment are byproducts of the practice of bhakti. And this is mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And we see that how lack of awareness and lack of detachment are what the cause the core issue that we just saw previously, which is habit formation and lack of self-control. And Krishna describes this vicious cycle that we just saw at an external level in a much internal level in the Bhagavad Gita. What does he say? He says, Dhyayato Vishayan Pumsa Sangashteshu Pajayate Sangat Sanjayate Kama Kamat Krodho Bhijayate Krodhat Bhavati Sammoha Sammohat Smriti Vibhrama Smriti Bhramshat Buddhinasho Buddhinashat Pranashyati. So what he says is Dhyayato Vishayan Pumsa Sangashteshu Pajayate. Just by paying attention to what? To Vishayan, seeing something as a sense object. So to paying attention to sense objects. What does it do? Sangasteshu pajayate. It creates an attachment. So you're repeatedly paying attention to a particular website or a particular like a practice, digital media practice, that creates an attachment, a proclivity, an inclination. So that attachment is what deepens into intense desire. Sangat sanjayate kama. So the word lust here indicates that intense, maddening desire that is created by the power of uh, attachment. Sangat sanjayate kama, kamat krodho bhijayate. So much so that when somebody snatches away our phone from us, what do? We become angry, upset, right? So kamat krodho bhijayate. Because there has been that intense development of desire that we can no longer live without it. We pretty much are married to our gadgets. Kamat krodho bhijayate. And when we are separated from it, we feel as if we lost such an important person in our life. Krodhat bhavati sammoha. So krodhat bhavati sammoha is when one is terribly upset. What happens? Their consciousness is clouded. So they simply can't see what the reality is. And they may take an extreme measure for something that's very simple. Somebody taking away the phone as a plaything. Krodhat bhavati sammoha. The person's consciousness is completely clouded. Some moha. Moha is illusion or delusion. Some moha is overall delusion or complete delusion. Some moha smriti vibhrama. When one is completely deluded, they simply cannot recall any good instructions that came or any good instructions that were told or any good things they learned. So smriti vibhrama happens. Memory is bewildered. So they cannot recollect good things, basically. Smriti Bhramshat Buddhi Nasho. When the Smriti is bewildered or when the memory is bewildered, there is Buddhi Nasho or the intelligence is destroyed. Why is the intelligence destroyed? Because intelligence makes decisions and these decisions are based in consultation with the memories or data from the memories. And that data, we no longer have access to it. The smriti or the memory has faltered. Therefore, the buddhi cannot make able decisions just because it doesn't have any memory to work with. Buddhi nashat pranashyati. And by the destruction of buddhi, the individual is lost. In the sense, they have fallen from their equanimity, from their good conscience, so from their good consciousness, and so on. And why does this happen in the first place to begin with? Two reasons. One, the mind wanders in the world of sense objects, pretty much like a person wandering in a shopping mall. So the mind is constantly on the lookout for information, and ideally information that it likes. And we'll see how it establishes its likes and dislikes in a second. But that's a mind is pretty much what does thinking mean? It means that the mind is actually looking for new information and analyzing it. Actually, the analysis happens in the buddhi, and the mind is on the lookout constantly in the field of objects around us. And the highlighted point here is objects of the senses. So when we see things as sense objects, that's when it leads to this kind of a fall down. Does it mean that we should stop paying attention? That's what some spiritualists may like to think. However, the Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam mention to us that we can still see the same objects, but not as sense objects. It can be seen as objects for our service, for performing our dharma, for performing our seva. So we'll see how this paradigm shift in our consciousness can enable us to pay attention without getting entangled. And so this is a very helpful framework to understand what is actually happening. So whenever we take impressions from the social media, let's say that this star here is representing the external reality, and we take impressions through the media, or even just the very habit of using digital media in a certain way, like before sleeping or things like that. What happens is it leads to impressions in the chitta, which is, you can think of it as the storage. The memories are rested in there. And forget about this decide part here for a moment. And based on all these memories from the past, much before like we probably even got used to digital media, we have a certain disposition that we have formed based on all the past memories, the past lives, and so on. That creates our identity. And this identity is called ahankara. When we say this is so me, this is just not me, we are alluding to our ahankara, or our sense of identity. Actually, more precisely, it's the sense of false identity that we have made ourselves believe. And from this identification, we cultivate what is me and what is not me. So when the mind goes out to shop in the field of information, it tries to look for information that it likes or dislikes based on the ahankara the person has. People with a certain ahankara like certain things and dislike certain things. And this is at the level of the mind. The mind has its likes and dislikes in consultation with the ahankara. And the buddhi is what can put a full stop and say that it's time to end the shopping and get back home. Or it can give in to the manas and say that the things, the likes that you're looking for are better found elsewhere. So let's go there and shop further and further and further until we break down. So the buddhi can either guide the manas in a spiritual direction, in an uplifting direction, or the buddhi can give in to the manas desires and show it a way to fall down more rapidly. So therefore, the buddhi is a double-edged sword. It can either help or make the dealings with the manas worse. So this is how the Sankhya framework helps us understand that the mind is shopping for information in conjunction with the ahankara and buddhi, and the chitta is where all the memories are stored that the buddhi uses for decision making. Now, what is the solution for this? Krishna describes in the Bhagavad Gita that yato yato nischalati manaschañchalam asthiram tatastato niyamyetat atmanyeva vasham nayet. So yato yato nischalati, wherever the mind goes. So the mind, as we just saw, it's literally in the shopping mall of the world. Literal in the sense mentally. So yato yato nischalati, wherever it wanders. Manas chanchalam asthiram. Asthiram is, there is no fixity to it. It just is so chanchal, or it just keeps wandering, wandering, wandering. And what are we supposed to do about it? We look at the V factor here, actually, which is indicated by this sun-like image here. That is the Atma, or the soul, who is witnessing this all drama unfolding in front of it. And when the mind goes shopping, what does the Atma do? Or what is the Atma supposed to do? Well, the Atma is supposed to engage the mind and bring it back. And how it happens? Atmanyeva vasham nayet. Bring it back under the control of the self. What does it exactly mean? We'll see in a bit. And here is another important analogy that we can derive a lot of solutions from. And here, this is the analogy from Kata Upanishad. And the analogy of a chariot is described to see how the embodied soul, the Atman, engages with the world outside. So we have the world outside around us, right? It's made of lots of objects, which are made of these primarily 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air, and space. And to engage with these objects, we have the senses. And therefore, these objects are primarily seen as sense objects, or the objects with which the senses or the indriyas engage with. And what are the senses that we have? The senses that engage with this world, or with the objects, are primarily the jnanendriyas, or the senses that give information about this world by engaging with them. The seeing, the eyes, and the objects that are anything that is visual. Those are the objects that are associated with the eye. The ears and the objects that are associated with them are anything that's oral, any sound that we can perceive in this world. And for example, this screen that you are seeing and the audio that you are hearing is a complex combination of both. So you have the visual that the eye takes in, and you have the oral that the ear takes in. And both of them are interpreted together in the mind to give you that seamless experience that you are experiencing. And then we have the nose that can sense the smells in this world. And we have the tongue that can taste. And we have the skin that can touch and feel objects. Like you can, for example, when you lift a gadget, you know that that sensation primarily because the skin is touching it and the mind is reading it. So in this analogy, these 5 senses which engage with their objects are pretty much like horses looking for food, or ahara. And this ahara is what the senses feed on, and therefore these are sense objects. But when this starts happening in an excess manner, or overindulgence, it is called atyahara, or the person has consumed excess than what is needed to survive themselves. Right? This does not only mean the physical anna, or the food that the person intakes, but also food for everything, food for the eyes, food for the ears, food for the mouth, food for the skin, and food for the nose. So all of these are the ahara with which the senses engage in. And engaging in excess is what is atyahara. And to curb that, we need a way to disengage, or in other words, some kind of a intermittent fasting. And that is where the concept of digital fasting fits into the framework of reducing atyahara, which is one of the factors that can lead a person to the wrong direction and into completely materialistic realm of existence, so much so that the person breaks down. And how does this happen in the chariot? There are five senses, the five horses, they are each running for their own food. And when one is bored, then the person looks for entertainment in another type of food. And when this happens over a period of time, it just is so addictive. We just saw how paying attention to sense objects is itself entrapping. We just saw in the previous Bhagavad Gita 2.62, Dhyayata Vishayan Pumsaha verse. And when we have to deal with the objects in this world, it's better to do it in a regulated manner. And therefore, we need to take a break as needed, as per our nature. And we need to that way disengage the horses from running in all directions and collapsing the chariot of our existence. And the horses, how do we, or in other words, how can the horses be controlled, right? So, how can we achieve self control? In other words, this happens by holding the horses with the ropes, right? And how do we hold the horses? With the rope of the mind. So Krishna explains how the mind is the central sense that around which all the other senses revolve. Therefore, any ahara or any input that is taken from any of the senses is read by the mind, and that is what derives the sense of likes or dislikes, basically something that's pleasurable or something that is hateful, or like disgusting, whatever negative adjectives you want to use. And these ropes don't operate on their own. There is somebody who can control. I mean, in other words, actually the ropes can operate on their own if the horses are what are driving the ropes. Let's say we give up the control uh, from the hand of the charioteer or the driver and let the horses take charge. Now, each of the horses can run and feed in any direction they like, pulling the chariot in all kinds of haphazard ways, and ultimately collapsing the chariot because each horse wants to run away in different directions. And in order to not let that happen, the buddhi, the charioteer, needs to be strong to be able to hold the mind and be able to say that enough of shopping, now get back home. And that can happen through two things: knowledge and detachment. So that's what we previously saw. This is very important to have the right knowledge and to not give in to every small temptation. We need some detachment. We need to create distance from the objects of our senses. And because the senses anyway want to engage in pleasurable things, anyway wants to engage in its objects. And the mind, of course, anytime, wake up from the sleep, whatever you like to indulge in, the mind would love to do it. But the buddhi has to have the knowledge and the detachment to hold strong the rope of the mind and hence the horses of the senses. So, how does this happen? Well, we need to strengthen the buddhi, and knowledge and detachment are important. How is the buddhi strengthened? Bhagavad Gita explains the buddhi is actually strengthened through wisdom, primarily through knowledge as well as uh, practicing, sadhana. So both ways the buddhi actually is strengthened. And why is this the case? Usually we may underestimate the power of knowledge, but if you see the first prayer that we read, Om Agyana Timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. What it says is Agyana Timirandhasya. So Andha is darkness, blindness. Agyana Timirandhasya is referring to an eye that has been blinded by the cataract of ignorance. Jnananjana Shalakaya. So Shalakaya is applying, Anjana is an ointment. Applying the ointment of Jnana. Those who are from the Indian background, they may know what Kajal is. The mascara that's applied around the eye. So in the ancient days, there used to be a way of curing the cataract by applying that ointment around the eye. And I don't know the mechanics of it, but it helped cure the cataract. And when the cataract is cured, what happens? The eye can truly open. Chakshurun militam. Yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. So a guru does this process of applying the ointment of divine knowledge, Divya Jnana Hriday Prakashito, of divine knowledge, by which the cataract of ignorance can be cured and the eyes can open to real knowledge. So this is very fundamental, that we have the right knowledge, the right spiritual knowledge, and it comes by the grace of the Guru, and who teaches us the Shastras, and like the Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam. So all these Shastras, when we study under the guidance of the Guru, then the buddhi is nourished, and the buddhi becomes strong. And when the charioteer of buddhi is strong, the mind can be held firm and the senses can move as directed by the buddhi instead of being directed by the wandering mind. So therefore strengthening the buddhi is important with knowledge. And we will just see in the next verse how does this how does the this control arise. One is you make the charioteer strong, but is that all that is needed? Well, the charioteer must hold the mind firm as well. Just because the charioteer is strong, it doesn't mean that the person can just hold. So there is both knowledge as well as the detachment or strength that is needed. So Krishna is confirming Arjuna's question here when Arjuna said that it's so difficult to control the mind. Krishna agrees with Arjuna. He says, so this is Shri Bhagavan Uvacha, Asamshayam Mahabaho, Mano Durnigraham Chalam, Abhyasena tu Kaunteya, Vairagyena cha Grihyate. So Krishna says that it's very difficult, Mano Durnigraham Chalam, to curb the restless mind. The mind just wants to go wherever it wants. Just don't stop it, is what it's all it asks. And therefore, it's very difficult to control the mind. But how is it possible? Krishna gives the clue. Abhyasena tu kaunteya vairagyena cha grihyate. By practice and by detachment. So this is very, very important. Just like we habituated ourselves into like falling into the digital paradigm, similarly, we cultivate a suitable practice to fall out of the digital, like enslavement. I shouldn't say, yeah. So just like we enslaved ourselves into the digital mess, similarly, we can disengage or disenslave, or from this by suitable practice and by detachment. And so one more point, I think, before we move on to the practical remedies, is that Krishna mentions in the Bhagavad Gita that Bhogaishvarya prasaktanam taya apahrita chetasam vyavasayatmika buddhi samadhau na vidiyate. So this is a very important verse which mentions, I think it is 2.44 if I remember right, but otherwise you can look it up. Bhogaishvarya prasaktanam is how it starts. What does Krishna teach in this verse? Prasakta is strong attachment. To what? Bhogaishvarya. Bhoga is enjoyment and Aishwarya is opulence. By strong attachment to enjoying things and opulent things, taya apahrita chetasam, what happens? The consciousness is stolen away. And what happens as a result? Vyavasayatmika buddhi samadhau na vidhiyate. There is no scope for productive intelligence. Vyavasayatmika buddhi is that single pointed intelligence that can actually do something useful. When the mind is so mesmerized by bhoga and aishwarya, there is no scope for the intelligence to have a say in the right direction, because the intelligence is busy fulfilling the fantasies of the mind. And this is when the consciousness is stolen and the individual meets with a breakdown. We saw in 2.62 and 63. Therefore, it's important that we strengthen the buddhi and in that manner control the manas, so that we can steer this chariot of human existence in the right direction and not fall prey to digital or physical entrapments. And if you see in this whole picture here, the Atma or the soul is a passenger on the chariot that is witnessing this whole thing. And if the chariot is collapsing, the Atma gets bewildered. And if the chariot is moving in the right direction by the able charioteer, the Atma is well situated in a progressive stage of existence and can achieve its both material dharmas as well as the ultimate spiritual goal. Now, do we have any questions before we get on to the practical remedies? I see there are some messages in the chat. Okay. Okay, yeah. Prabhu shared the verse. Yes, it's 2.44. The Bhogaishwarya Prasaktanam verse. Thank you, Prabhu. So, some practical remedies are important to make our life run with seamlessness in this pretty much digital bombardment that we have in our life. So digital realm is not a bad thing to be in. No, otherwise it would be ironic that we are discussing over digital media, whatever we are. At the same time, it requires maturity to handle the empowerment that we are bestowed with. In this case, it happens to be the digital media, which is certainly empowering if we use in moderation, and enslaving if we use in excess. And some practical remedies we can see from the Bhagavad Gita. What does Krishna teach us? Abhyasena tu kaunteya vairagyena cha grihyate. The wanderings of the mind can be curbed by practice and detachment. And what practice is he really talking about? He mentions this. he mentions this in the same chapter. The practice that he's talking about is in 6.26. Wherever the mind wanders, bring it back. And it's actually by the intelligence that the mind is brought back. I don't know if I have the verse here. Probably not, but let me just uh, put it up on Veda base. It's actually just the verse before in 6.25. Okay. I'm just going to put it on this share screen. Just a second here. Okay. So this is a very important verse as well. Shanaihi shanair uparamed buddhya dhriti grihitaya atma samstham manak kritva na kinchit api chintayet. Says that shanai gradually. It cannot happen in a single day. I mean, the mind took so long to actually absorb itself into the digital mess. So it also should organically take some time to come out of it. So Krishna is saying that shanaihi, gradually, step by step. Uparamed buddhya dhriti krihitaya. By intelligence that is sustained in full conviction. So dhriti is determination or conviction. And this arises in the buddhi when the buddhi is strong. And with this, what one should do? They should hold back. Uparamid is one should hold back, or the mind should be fixed on the self alone and should think of nothing else. Basically, the mind should gradually be detached from shopping for likes and dislikes and put back in the self of our sanatan, or like the dharma, which is of the soul, the jaiva dharma or sanatan dharma, however it is called. It is basically the dharma of the soul, which is to serve the supreme soul. And in that manner, one should engage the mind by the intelligence back into the soul and the supreme soul. So that is the key that Krishna is giving in the 6th chapter on how we can control the restless mind by a strong intelligence. And this is the practice that Krishna is alluding to when he is saying abhyasena tu kaunteya vairagyena cha grihyate. So that abhyasa is what we just saw. By using the intelligence, one should draw the mind gradually away from the shopping mall, back into home where it belongs, to the Supreme Soul. And now, when this happens, there needs to be some detachment as well. So, vairagyena cha grihyate. So, detachment is important because otherwise the mind will again and again do the same thing, running into the sense objects. Slowly, slowly, one must get a higher taste and detach from the lower tastes of this world. And when that happens, the mind is better situated. And that way, the mind becomes uh, rested instead of restless. So, the mind will be rested in home and meditating on the right things than being in the shopping mall and falling down. So this is important and to strengthen the intelligence, therefore, and by practice and detachment, the mind can be welcomed back, or taken back from the externalities of this world. So now, if there are any questions, you may ask till now, whatever we discussed. Otherwise, we'll proceed with the next section, which is about practical remedies that we can derive based on the Bhagavad Gita. Okay, so looks like no questions as of now, so I will continue. So,
There are no questions, but there is one comment, Prabhu.
yes, please.
I think it is in the YouTube. It's coming from Shandesh Prabhu, Shandesh V. Burgaonkar Prabhu.
Okay.
Thanks for the talk. It was thoughtfully organized and delivered. It's a side point that perhaps will disagree to the claim you made about dopamine that it is not the cause of processes that lead to pleasure anticipation, but it is the pleasure anticipation that leads to the release of dopamine in the brain. I think you said the same thing, maybe.
Yeah.
Fairly well understood in the medical science that release of right chemicals in the brain can cause mood swings. Example, psychiatrists prescribe medications that modulate serotonin levels in the brain in order to treat depression and anxiety disorders.
Yes. So, yes, the
Yeah.
point is well taken. Yeah. Is there more to the comment, Prabhu?
Yes, so even though the mind by itself is a powerful agent in a human psyche, evidence points to the fact that the causation is naturalistic in nature.
Okay. Is that all?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So there are two aspects to this. One is the mind can be stimulated and the mind can stimulate. So when the mind is stimulated by external means, like Prabhu alluded to drugs in this case, then sure it can influence the state of the mind. At the same time, when the mind is stimulated by something else, like some happy thing that whatever the person likes, it also releases the hormones. So that is what we were discussing, and the more pertinent point about the release of dopamine. And therefore, the person's habit to like look at the devices or engage with the social media or whatever the conditioning is at in consideration. So all of those, they can um, stimulate the mind, and the mind looks for similar stimulation again, and therefore the person engages back with the devices, and that way there is a vicious cycle. In other words, there is also, this is the habit formation that is happening, and it is forming in this case because the mind is looking for that uh, the happiness, for lack of better word, the stimulation. And similarly, when we need to force the mind out of it, we need to convince the mind that it's not just this happiness, short-term happiness or prayers that one should be looking for, but one should be looking for overall happiness or shreyas. And that can happen when we have a long-term goal in mind and the buddhi can engage the manas effectively. The mind is a very powerful tool. It's an extremely powerful tool. That's why placebo studies work. And the mind can absorb anything that is shown to it, just like the moon absorbs the light of the sun, and or the sponge absorbs the water. And it's in our hands to use this mind carefully. Therefore, in a sense, we'll see eventually that the problem is not in the devices, really, it's in the mind. So it's the mind that needs the remedy, and as a consequence, we regulate our use of the devices. It's not the devices that are a problem. It's some conditioned mind that engages with them. For that matter, in this world, there is a beautiful verse um that talks about Yukta Vairagya. Whatever is present in this world can be engaged in Krishna's service or God's service, and for with a spiritual purpose in mind. And therefore, nothing is really uh, uh, unusable. So everything can be used. And similarly, devices can also be used in the service of God and God's plan for the world. And so therefore, it's important to keep in mind that devices are not the demons, but the demons are actually inside the mind. And that is what needs regulation. So this digital fasting is especially relevant in today's age because post-pandemic, we have gotten into another pandemic, which is the device pandemic. So pandemic, the actual pandemic that we had at the material level is what was tangible and can be seen, and there is a lot of obviously loss and suffering because of that. But there is an unseen pandemic that is very subtle and pretty much invisible. That's the digital pandemic that we have gotten into as a result. And this is the atyahara that the mind engages with on a day-to-day basis, therefore needs a lot of attention and scrutiny to engage maturely with the digital paraphernalia or the digital things that we use. And therefore, we can come up with certain regulations based on the principles of the Bhagavad Gita. So one is we need knowledge and detachment. We saw two things are very important. So knowledge of what? In this particular case, of all the bad effects that we just saw some of them, plus the knowledge of the good effects that we also saw some of them. And using all this knowledge, we need to create awareness of how much device we need to use for our service based on our nature, based on the engagement that we need versus what we want, even unknowingly. So that can be put to use by screen time, right? So we can regulate the amount of screen time that can be used, as one of those American Economic Review studies indicated. And this is how in our space time we can restrict our screen time. And I actually put a point space for something else. So it's in our time, we can say here, and in our space we can create device-free zones. For example, we can not have devices during performing sadhana, seva, or while resting. Studies have shown that use of devices, especially during bedtime, just before going to bed, interferes with the sleep negatively, and that causes so many other problems. Therefore, usually, like if you read any research, they would recommend 1 or 2 hours before bedtime, don't use devices. Similarly, with sadhana or seva, bhakti or spiritual practice is all about absorption, and we cannot be present at two places at the same time. If half of our mind is in the phone, that means we are actually not doing sadhana or seva, or even sleeping for that matter, because it's the attention is broken into many parts. So we need that unbroken or that focused intelligence. That's why Krishna says, Vyavasatmika buddhi ekeha kurunandana bahushakahyanantascha buddhayo avyavasayinam. What is productive intelligence? Productive intelligence, Vyavasatmika buddhi ekehe kurunandana, is single pointed. Bahushakahyanantascha buddhayo avyavasayinam. What makes the intelligence unproductive? By branching out into multiple places, bahushaka, by branching out into multiple areas. So I cannot have phone in my consciousness when I am chanting or when I am performing service or when I am sleeping, unless the service is performed through the phone, even in which case the focus is not on the laptop or the phones that you're using right now, but on the content that's being delivered. So in this manner, we should be very clear in our intelligence that we have to have device-free zones, not just physically, but also mentally. And in our consciousness, this is the other important thing. Bhoga Aishwarya Prasaktanam Taya Apahrita Chetasam Vyavasatmika Buddhi Samadhav na Vidiyate. It's not possible to have productive intelligence when the person is so attached to Bhoga and Aishwarya, or like opulence and enjoyment. And why does this happen? When we start seeing it as an object, things as objects of enjoyment or sense objects, This phone is meant for enjoyment because I'm expecting something out of it that's going to stimulate my mind, make it pleasurable. So these sense objects, our vision of seeing these things as sense objects needs to change. The paradigm shift needs to happen in our consciousness. We need to see these as energy of Krishna or energy of God than as sense objects that are meant for my enjoyment. That way, we would transform our paradigm from a bhog aishwarya to a seva, or like engaging with Krishna's divine energy instead. And for such a person, there is nothing material really. If somebody is able to see that, then everything is spiritual. Sarvam khalavidam brahma, Chandogya Upanishad says. So everything is spiritual for such a person, if they have the right eyes to see it. So similarly, all our devices are also God's energy, God's creation in a sense, because the intelligence that went into creating these devices was also generated by someone else, and the brains and so on. So in our consciousness, we need to have this paradigm shift so that we don't see these as sense objects and we see them as Krishna's energy. Because only if we see these as sense objects, only then there is a fall down. Dhyayato Vishayan Pumsaha. When we see them as Vishaya or sense objects, only then there is the cycle of fall down. If we stop seeing them as sense objects and see them as in connection with Krishna, in connection with God, as expansions of the divinity, then we will no longer be subject to the material consciousness, and we can still use the devices in Krishna's service, in performing our dharma and seva. So that is what directly our consciousness leads to the way in which we use these devices. So the usage will change when our consciousness changes. Though it's the same phone, it's the same person. It's the same Arjuna who was before Bhagavad Gita, he was a Kshatriya. After Bhagavad Gita, also he was a Kshatriya. What changed? The consciousness. The consciousness of performing the dharma as a service to Krishna. So similarly, it's the same phone, it's the same person, but the paradigm has changed. The person no longer lives in the material reality, but has subscribed to a spiritual reality. And repeated subscription makes it a habit. And we'll see how that repetition holds the key. So the other important thing is in creating safe spaces. So just like in time we regulated, in space, physical space, we regulated by having device-free zones. Similarly, in the digital space, there can be safe spaces that can be created by establishing content boundaries, or what are the things the person might browse, and create distance from temptations. Maybe use the device when another person is around, and make yourselves accountable. Tell them that if I use this more than 15 minutes, just snatch it from me. I don't care, right? I mean, just giving an example. So create accountability and create distance from temptations, because when the temptations arise, we may not have the strength to fight them because we may be too strongly conditioned. But the buddhi, the able buddhi or the strong buddhi's work is to create distance from the temptation. In other words, create the scenario in such a way that you are not even close to, don't put yourself into temptations, into tempting scenarios. So, and in other words, this is actually creating a distance, or slowly by this, detachment happens from the temptation. And the by doing this, this is half of it. This is the nivritti, or detaching from the temptation. And the pravritti, or the progressive path, involves replacing the temptation with an object of contemplation. So we can actually use, or we can subscribe to a worthy object of contemplation than the forced temptation due to our conditioning. And that way, when we get a higher taste, then the lower taste can easily be given up. Because the mind cannot give attachment. It has to be attached somewhere or the other. And when it's attached to spiritual reality, naturally material reality will disappear from its vicinity. And when it's attached to material reality, the spiritual reality will disappear from its vicinity. Therefore, it's important to create that distance from the temptations. And as we discussed before, the solution is actually not for the device, it's for the mind. And we saw that the mind likes to live in the shopping mall of this world, likes to shop around, and the buddhi needs to be strong to hold it and pull it back into the self. And when it's focused on the self, then it starts seeing spiritual revelations unfold. And there is a whole process of sadhana, which is not the topic of this lecture, but it is the bhakti sadhana has 9 limbs to it. And by subscribing repeatedly to the sadhana, one attains the sadhya or the bhava or spiritual reality. And for that to happen, the person has to be single pointed and absorbed when they are performing the sadhana. And that is not possible when they are engaged in weapons of mass distraction, which are the digital devices that we have engulfed ourselves with. And so the easiest way to for the mind to overcome temptations of digital enticement are absorption in mantra. And mantra is that by contemplating on which one is delivered from the lower reality of this world. Mananat trayate iti mantraha. So mananat is contemplation. Krishna says contemplation is the way to fall down, right? But on what? When contemplation is on the vishayan or the sense objects of this world. The same contemplation holds this key to uplift oneself. And instead of the sense objects, one can see them as Krishna's energies, and one can actually associate with Krishna's energy in the form of Hare through the Maha Mantra. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So this mantra, or any mantra of God for that matter, can uplift one from the material reality they are in. And this is considered the Maha Mantra, or the best of the mantras, and especially for this Kali Yuga. And this is confirmed in Kali Santarana Upanishad. Iti Shodashakam Namnam Kali Kalmashanashanam Natah Parataropaya Sarva Vedeshu Drishyate. Shodashakam. It is 16 words are there in the mantra. Shodashaka Namnam. 16 names are there in the mantra. Kali Kalmashanashanam. The evil that is present in Kali Yuga, including the digital evil, Kali Kalmashanashanam, Nataf Parataropaya Sarva Vedeshu Drishyate. In all the repositories of knowledge, Sarva Vedeshu stands for all the Vedas. Vedas also mean knowledge. Everywhere, whatever has to be known, among all those sources of knowledge, there is nothing, no better means that is seen than chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And this is what Kali Santarana Upanishad says. And how do we engage with the mantra? We know how to engage with the device. Just take on, keep on taking it for 10 days, and 11th day onward, your device will show up in front of the face without even asking for it. So this happens by repetition, habit formation. Similarly, the problem that happened by repetition can also be remedied by repetition itself. That's why Vedanta Sutra says Anandamaya Abhyasat. And what kind of abhyasa or what kind of repetition needs to be done? The repetition of sadhana, the repetition of mantra sadhana. And by this, the habit, spiritual habit is also formed. And that way, one can take the mind out of not just the illusion of device entanglements, but the total material entanglements that we have subscribed ourselves to. Until we subscribe, we have a choice whether or not we want to subscribe. But the moment you subscribe, the content you see is not in your hands. Therefore, subscribe wisely. So, subscribe the mind into things that are meant for upliftment than the things that can cause its fall down. This is the essential purport of the talk. And in summary, what we saw is that the digital paradigm has established itself is an inevitable reality for the present day. And this is more so the case after the pandemic, when we have um, unknowingly become part of the digital pandemic. And why pandemic? Because it can cause unwanted behaviors or unwanted habits or unwanted outcomes in the life of the users of these devices. And these are there are pros to it, of course. It is definitely an empowering thing to have devices at our disposal where we can listen to information that are thousands of miles away, or we can communicate with someone who are thousands of miles away, disseminating spiritual knowledge, uplifting knowledge, receiving it. And so there are good things and there are bad things as well. But statistically, the bad things take predominance because the mind of the user is conditioned. If the mind of the user is transcendental and not conditioned, the user can maturely use these devices for upliftment of themselves as well as the others around them. And it's the conditioned mind that traps us in this vicious cycle. And we saw how the solution lies in self-awareness or knowledge and detachment. Therefore, Krishna says that we need abhyasa and vairagya. So vairagya is detachment and abhyasa is practice. And how will you practice? Once you know that there is a problem and once you know that this is the solution. The solution is yato yato nischalati manaschanchalam astiram tato tatastato niyam yetat. So he says, Krishna says, bring it back. So that's the practice. And for that, there has to be awareness that the mind has wandered. So be the alert gatekeeper of yourself and watch where the mind is going. If the mind is getting stuck in an unhealthy emotional state or inside unhealthy digital media, bring it back. So that's the practice that one has to cultivate. And just like we cultivated the practice, nobody is born with a device in their hand. Maybe today you can dispute that claim, but unfortunately, it's just that we get used to it because we think it's natural. However, what is natural is there are different objects to engage with in this world. And what is unnatural is we get caught up in it because we think it is okay. Everybody is doing the same thing. There's nothing wrong and nobody talks about it. So it must not be a big deal. But when you see the US Surgeon General recommending that there needs to be a warning label on digital media or social media in particular, especially for kids and young minds that are not mature enough to handle it, then it rings an alarm bell. And it's not just youth and children. It's also adults that overuse the devices. Therefore, we need to cultivate healthy self-awareness and detachment on one side and engage with a higher spiritual reality so that we can deal with these devices with more maturity. So disengage from the material reality and engage in the spiritual reality. That's the solution. And how can that happen? Disengage is through detachment, self-awareness or knowledge and practice. And attachment is also by a similar manner. Repeatedly cultivate. That's what is called sadhana. And by doing that, one gets the higher taste. One no longer needs to put in their willpower, determination, and hold tight for the mind to come out. Rather, the mind itself will give up the lower tendencies and reach a higher state where you no longer need your willpower to control the mind. In fact, the mind will tell you it's time to wake up, it's time to do your sadhana, it's time to do something good in the service of Krishna or in service of God. And so all these things, the mind will give the impetus at some point. In other words, Prabhupada says the person is forcefully dragged to success beyond a certain stage. Until we reach that stage, until we reach that nishtha or steadiness, we have to exert our willpower, make conducive environment so that we stay in our safe space, in our sacred space, stay protected, and gradually elevate ourselves. Shanai Shanai, Krishna says. So gradually do that. And this is possible by establishing healthy spiritual and material practices. We saw spiritual practices like sadhana and mantra, and material practices. We saw how we can create device-free zones. We can keep it time-bound, screen time. We saw how we can create safe spaces by content boundaries and being accountable, and so on. So some of these things. I hope this was helpful. And if I have spoken anything that even remotely offends you, please excuse me. And do let me know if there are any questions. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.
Hari Bol, Krishna
Hare Krishna.
Chaitanya Prabhu. That was a very nice lecture, very nice presentation, and very pertinent topic. Um, I was just thinking that among the many solutions you put, I will also add association there. Association
Mm,
with the devotees in the temples, or association if you are addicted to YouTube, you can watch, long kirtans. ISKCON is famous for very long kirtans, right? 3 hours,
mm,
6 hours, like that.
yeah.
Because when you are associating with that, it naturally calms your mind. I have seen that. It's my personal experience. Like flipping through many things in the media, right?
Mm,
Naturally slows your mind. It slows down your mind and it calms you, gives some satisfaction, and then
This
that's
is
what.
very important point you made. I'm glad you made this. So yeah, association is utmost important because that is how we actually get conditioned in the first place in
Yes.
a good way. So if we are in the right association, we condition ourselves with a spiritually conducive environment, and that's how we progress further. And for example, if somebody is very devoted to attending kirtans or listening to talks, lectures, spiritual, then they are actually not engaging with the device as much as engaging with the content that is presented, in the sense of the uplifting content, like listening to kirtans. So it's like an audio playing from an audio device, for example. So yeah, definitely, like technology can and must be used in service of Krishna and uplifting devotees. And to best do it, one needs to have guidance from good association of devotees.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you. Very, very nicely prepared slides. Let me quickly check if there are any other online comments.
Yes, please. Paul.
Looks like there are none. But I'm sure people are listening. I know that because once in a while, people come to me and say that, hey, Achyuta Kumar Prabhu gave a very nice lecture. Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu gave a nice lecture. I'm quite sure there are people there who are listening, and that's fine. Although there are no comments, but that's fine.
I will be very glad if it is useful to some devotees and people in general. So thank you for broadcasting it.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you, Lama. So we will end it now.
Yes. Krishna Chaitanya Ananda Prabhu ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Right.
और भक्त वृंद की जय। वांछा नमो नमः। Thank you, devotees, for taking time from your busy schedule and joining this online class, online only class. We'll meet again next Wednesday for the online class. Thank you.
Okay. Hare Krishna.
We'll end the session.